Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. Everything we call black gold is the oil that we have discovered in this country and excites every Ugandan. The exploration, the discovery, the extraction, but most of all, what has happened to things like the refinery. 6.5 billion barrels is what has been predicted, 1.4 billion barrels to be recoverable. But when we look at the global trends and we look at Russia, Ukraine, and we look at the cuts by the OPEC countries there, and have cut about 1 million barrels since June. And they're predicting to cut even more to 3.3 million barrels coming towards the end of the year. What does that mean for the pump? The biggest pain for every Ugandan is getting to that pump and having a price that is lower. When we look at prices in the last few months, petrol from 4,950 to now about 5,600. And when we look at diesel, from 4,700 to now 5,120. The biggest pain is logistics, transportation of people, foodstuff. All these are affected by the prices of petrol. Will the proposal made by the Ministry of Energy be able to vindicate every Ugandan, especially absorb the shocks that come with it? Will it be able to bring that into perspective? Or is it worth any salt of any Ugandan to be able to pay attention to this? Today, we focus on the oil, we focus on the fuel, we look at UNOC and ask ourselves, will this give us the relief we desire? Let's meet the panel.
Uganda's oil discovery heralds a transformative era, poised to elevate the nation through robust infrastructure and poverty reduction. Witness the progress. The Albertine Region's International Airport nears completion, boasting top-tier quality. Hoima, our commercial hub, is experiencing substantial growth. Oil is set to contribute a staggering net present value of $2 billion annually, 10% of GDP, for over 2 decades. While skeptics label oil a curse, Uganda is steering full throttle towards prosperity. This Wednesday, join Timothy Nyangweso on Behind the Headlines, where we dissect expectations and debunk myths. Our distinguished panel includes Honorable Dr. Flight Captain Mike Mukula, a dynamic figure blending business acumen with political prowess and renowned for his flamboyance. Honorable Ruth Nankabira, leading the charge in energy and mineral resources, she guides the pivotal discussion. Dr. Fred Muhumuza, an astute economist, providing invaluable insights into Uganda's economic trajectory. Angelo Izam, formerly a prominent journalist covering the Albertine region, now a key figure at Uganda Investment Authority. A name synonymous with brilliance. Every Wednesday at 10 p.m. meet Professor Sarah Sally, Dean of the School of Women and Gender Studies. Tune in to Behind the Headlines with Timothy Nyangweso exclusively on your public broadcaster, UBC. Witness the power of progress. Ignite the spirit of Uganda.
So you have met the panel and you can be part of the discussion. Go to our YouTube channel, drop your comment there. Let us know what you think about fuel and the oil platform. Drop your comment, hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines. Let us know what you think. Also the number 0709 60 25 92. That's the number both by text and WhatsApp. We'll be getting to your messages in a short while. Gentlemen, it's a manner right now. We'll be joined by Dr. Sarah in a short while. Thank you so much for coming and thank you for gracing us. By Ali Sekatawa, the Director of Legal and Corporate Affairs at the Petroleum, joining us. Thank you. So let's get to it. Petroleum Supply Act, and there are amendments in there to make UNOC one of the biggest recipients there. Not a retailer, but one of the biggest recipients there. What does that mean? Do we get there? And she says the resolution was passed by cabinet on 3 reasons. 1, to stabilize the price. 2, to eliminate Kenya that has taken control of what is happening there. But also 3, to ensure that there's energy independence. What do those things mean for you and I, especially when we look at the pump that is there? Ali, let me come to you. And 6 billion barrels of oil, we're excited. And we're wondering, where are we? What is the history? Where are we with the refinery exploration? Give us a bit of a brief on our oil sector.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, viewers. In terms of our oil project, we are moving on very well. As you noted, we discovered commercial oil in 2006. We are following our two-pronged approach to commercialize that oil. One is to construct a pipeline to the coast, to Tanga, and the second one is to do the refinery that will be able to supply the local market in Uganda here and what we call the captive market. That is Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. The refinery, its capacity, because our estimation is that the 60,000 will be able to cover all the local requirements that we need and will be competitive enough because the products will be produced here in Uganda. In terms of progress, since we had FID, we are meeting all the milestones in the upstream. Tilenga is going on very well. I think you've seen that the construction is moving. In Kingfisher, we are also moving. The drilling started drilling and reached the wells to confirm that there is crude. The ECOP has started. Early works are going on both in part of doing the feed and the configuration. Consortium expired on 30th June this year, and we are now in the process of getting a new consortium on, and we are certain that we shall.
So let's get into the gist of the conversation. The minister stood on the floor of Parliament and said there's a proposal of amendments coming to the petroleum.
For the viewers to understand that the petroleum value chain has the upstream and the midstream. So the project in Tilenga and Kingfisher and the pipeline and the refinery, those are upstream and midstream projects. Basically, those are the ones to extract and refine our crude. The minister's policy direction relates to what we call the downstream, and that's the one right now that relates to trading of petroleum products. And why is it important? Is that because right now we are not producing any crude, we've been importing since independence or time immemorial, so that policy relates to the importation. The Petroleum Supply Act, which is in place, that was amended in 2003, related to importation of petroleum products into Uganda. It did not at all deal with anything that relates to importation of petroleum products from like Kenya to extend the border. It just looked at the Ugandan border. The new policy directive following the 2013 law that created Uganda National Oil Company is where government has evaluated the challenges that related to security of supply, as you've seen previously when there are problems in Kenya, and the question of the pricing of those petroleum products, and noted that at the importation point in Kenya, there is what is called a G2G arrangement between the government of Kenya and maybe the government of Saudi Arabia, or where oil is produced. And that G2G arrangement directly affects the Ugandan market, because ultimately between that structure and the final importation of petroleum in Uganda, there are middle players that increase on the cost of the product that reaches in Uganda. So the new policy directive is that it is enabling the Uganda National Oil Company which was created in 2013 by law, to now move to Kenya, acquire licenses and authorizations from Kenya, and be able to import crude at the Kenyan border without dealing with the Kenyan system, and then it can be in position to sell those Kenyan products to the Ugandan market. And by doing that, GOU is first of all trying to enable Uganda National Oil Company, which is our baby, and it's a standard, because if you look anywhere in the world, ADNOC, in UAE and so on, these are government entities, national oil entities. They are supported by their governments to grow and be able to secure products of that nature. So government has moved the border from here to Kenya, eliminated or is trying to eliminate the Kenyan middlemen and so on, and enabled UNOC to be able to trade from the border at Kenya and then deal with the Ugandan market. And that way it is anticipated that because whenever there are disruptions, vulnerabilities in the market, the Ugandan market has been made a secondary, because whenever there's a problem in Kenya, naturally the Kenyan supply market will prioritize the Kenyans compared to Ugandans. So this whole policy movement is about security of the supply in Uganda and reduction of the cost of importation, so that the ultimate pump price can be lower, but also now to build capacity with our national oil company. I think those are the three policy directives the minister introduced on the directive of His Excellency, the President, and on a structure which is going to be embedded in a law which says that the minister, UNOC, will be able to import, or any other entity that the minister will be able to license to do that structure.
Thank you, Ali. I'll get to the legal frameworks later. Dr. Mumza, let me come to you. Ugandans, all that matters is the pump price there. But also when you look at the cuts, they really cut deep. What is leading to the global cuts, especially by OPEC countries? When you look at them, OPEC plus, it was first 700,000 liters there. Then it came to about 1 million barrels there. Prediction is about 3 million barrels before the end of December there. What is leading to this, and how tight should our belts be?
Yeah, thank you, and good evening, our viewers. Certainly, even if it was me, I would cut if I want to get myself a good price, especially when you are selling an item that has what we call inelastic demand. You cannot run away because the price has gone up. Even if you run away, you can't run very far. You don't have substitutes. So the OPEC are taking advantage of us having no alternatives to cut the supply and keep that price. But also we need to see the geopolitics that is emerging, because Russia's supplies were going to Europe. Now Europeans say we're no longer going to supply Russia. Now Russia is closely associating with these other suppliers in order to pick up some benefits for themselves as a group. But you also have a situation where, and this is why we need to tighten our belts, that whenever winter comes, the northern hemisphere consumes more fuel to heating because of the need for heating. So even if the supplies remain the way they are, we are likely to see that increase in the demand for oil to counter the coldness of winter, increase that price. But also the northern countries, the rich countries, have begun to lower or not to increase their interest rates, meaning they are opening up for their economies to grow. And when those economies grow, again, they are going to guzzle oil. So we are likely to see an upward pressure on the price. And if the OPEC countries, as you've said, do not increase supply, sometimes the US comes in, but the US doesn't want to run down its reserves. It will only come in for a while and pull back to stabilize. So we're going to see that upward pressure remain. And that's why you come back to say, what are we trying to stabilize when the bulk of the oil drivers are beyond our control. If you look through the numbers, our tax is almost about 1,300 on a litre of petrol. Meaning if a litre of petrol is 5,400, almost 25% is tax. It's not going to change. The other remaining component is that barrel price. It can move up, it can stay where it is. So that barrel price, before you even refine and move it up to the pump price you're talking about, you add that barrel price and the tax, you're getting to about 63% of the cost. So the space we are entering may not actually lower the price. So Ugandans should not expect that this move is actually going to lower the price. It might, as I said, remove Kenyans, but they were not doing charity work. Neither is UNOC going to do charity work. Because I was reading through and they were saying once UNOC comes in, then Ministry of Finance may reduce its supply to it because it's a new revenue stream. So there are certain charges that UNOC will also sustain for its own survival, and like you would expect anybody to do. So I'm still waiting to say exactly what is going to be the decline from the 5,400 because of this new change in arrangement, which comes with its own risks that we can discuss later. But let's know that the oil is a global resource determined by many global things, including the Gaza-Russia war. All those things are going to play in. So we need to be really careful to say where is the tumor that we want to remove so that we don't damage the brain trying to look for a tumor which is maybe a small part. We need to deal with it, but how is my question.
And sticking with you, Doctor, just a follow-up question to couple it with what Ali said. When you look at this proposal, this policy proposal, and you put global effects like you have mentioned, when you couple them together, what are they trying to cure?
That's really my dilemma. Because sometimes you bring an axe and all you need is, you're trying to remove like a small thing. Even if these Kenyans were participating in, we are going to replace the Kenyans with UNOC. You want to say, would that pass on a benefit to me, the consumer? So the whole point of stabilizing the pump price may not be true because it's being influenced by these other things that are beyond UNOC and beyond these Kenyans. Now we might capture their profit margin that they were taking and bring it home. That can be a benefit. But every time you see somebody make a profit, he has done a very big investment. So you want to say, how is UNOC going to be funded to play in this very expensive space? Because oil you benefit from bulk. You might be making 100 shillings per litre, but because you are selling millions of litres, that becomes some substantial benefit for you as an individual. But you have sunk in so much. Uganda is consuming fuel possibly in the range of $4 million per day. So anybody coming in this space must have those deep pockets. You need to be paying URA upfront sometimes. Now, all those dynamics, I don't want to get to a level where UNOC is now negotiating with URA to say, please let the fuel come through. I will pay the taxes after I have recovered something. These other guys, I don't know how they were finding their money, but at least they were doing all that play. So it is a space we should have walked in without creating a monopoly for UNOC. Let UNOC play with the others. You understand the game, and then you begin to say, how do I slowly and gradually remove them and eat more space? But when you pass a law and say 1st of January 2024, UNOC is the sole supplier of petroleum products. And that's already a broad thing, not just oil, diesel, kerosene, and jet fuel. Petroleum products can be interpreted broadly. We'll wait for the legal interpretation if somebody doesn't come in there and then begin to hustle. We are walking into a space, we need to be in it, but I would have loved us to walk into it consciously because any mistake made, oil, you never want it to be disrupted. It's just like you are breathing. You don't breathe for a minute, you possibly are dead. So these are spaces you really want to consciously walk in, not to go in as an amateur and say, yes, I have found good space here, let me walk in. The learning curve can be very, very steep, and it's going to be steep for UNOC. And any mistake made, we will all feel it in the country.
Thank you very much. Angelo, coming to you, a lot of writing from you, especially in the area of the oil sector. When you hear what Ali has said, when you look at what our government has handled this sector, we seem to be toying carefully. What do you make of where we're coming from and this policy proposal?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and good evening to our viewers. First, I think that the direction that is being taken by the government on this particular issue, for the reasons that Ali has explained, energy security, strategic security, security of supply, and basically our independence as a landlocked country. All those factors are valid. And my feeling, Timothy, is that the timing, this discussion about domesticating supply has been around for over 10 years. The timing now, and we can talk about the geopolitics, both in the Middle East and even here in the region, because obviously the Kenyans won't be happy about a decision such as this, and they are powerful forces. We saw during the discussion about moving the pipeline route, if you remember, from Kenya to Tanzania. There are these elements, but in principle, as a landlocked country, we are always exposed to factors beyond our control. Our access to the sea, that's one. Political events with our neighbors, that is two. Okay. Our own desire to be independent of those factors and make sure that there is stability here within the economy, that is three. My feeling has always been that we have moved a bit late in trying to secure these very areas. And I'll give you an example. During the debate on whether or not Uganda should explore a much more stable route for the East African crude oil pipeline, we talked about all these strategic parameters, and I remember writing an open letter to the president to make this argument, to say, look, being landlocked, routing our commercial traffic through Kenya, at the same time routing our petroleum traffic through Kenya, it's a huge risk. We needed to find a way to balance that risk, and the pipeline through Tanzania, for all the other technical factors, gave us that. Secondly, Uncle Mike here is a military man, but you see, if you notice, for the last 10 to 15 years, defense spending in Uganda has been one of the highest in the region. I think apart from just 1 year, if I'm not mistaken. But we spend more on defense than Kenya, Rwanda, even Tanzania. We are the leaders in defense spending. Part of that is because being landlocked and in the neighborhood that we are in, you want to have a deterrent that if your neighbors, for example, God forbid, block access to the sea, you have the means, okay, to deter them, from continuing on that path. The challenge with defense spending is that it actually takes money from other sectors. So if you're spending top dollar on hardware, on building a professional army and supplying it, that money could have gone in other areas. So to reduce some of these pressures, including, for example, and if you project between this policy decision and the refinery that is coming maybe in the next 10 years, being energy independent allows us actually to save on these areas where we are over-prepared, particularly take the pressure away from having to spend so much on defense, make other arrangements to give us some breathing space. But Uganda, in my view, has to be, and we're on the path anyway, the oil is here, we can refine it, studies prove that we can be both a producer and a refiner and a supplier of refined products for ourselves. That is really the golden future. My sense of this deal, and why I agree with the policy direction, is that even if Dr. Mohamza says that there's going to be a steep learning curve, we should have been here 10 years ago. Our national oil company, which we are preparing now to take on not only distribution of refined products or imported products now, but later products of our own refinery, needs the practice run. And this decision is going in the right direction. There may be some commercial and other issues that the public can discuss, and that's okay. And I think the government should be transparent about that. But essentially, it's the right policy direction that we're taking. It gives us a 10-year head. I don't know what Ali's parameters are, but my sense is maybe another 6 to 7 years before we get a refinery. It gives us some runway, especially for the national oil company to build capacity. When we get to the point where we have our own refinery and we are in a position to supply ourselves and supply the region, this national oil company will be in a position to do that. Now, the instability that most people are talking about, I will leave that to the subject matter experts. It is not rocket science what these other players have been doing to try and have a stable downstream market. I don't think it is something beyond the means of UNOC to learn quickly and to be competent in securing for Uganda the benefits of stable pump prices, but also stable supply.
And Angela, you bring something interesting. You say, we're 10 years late to get here.
We are very much so, yeah.
And it was UNOC gets, if this proposal goes through, UNOC gets to be the supplier. Mm-hmm. What happens to LPG? What happens to the other byproducts that come out of this? Who manages this whole thing? Because we seem to be at the tail end of this elephant and leaving the rest of it to be there.
Well, LPG will come online the minute we start producing crude. And it's an interesting thing you mentioned. So the government plan, the way I've understood it, is, and this is where you find that security of supply can solve major problems. Right now, most Ugandans are relying on wood fuel for cooking. Once you start producing crude and you have got gas that comes with that crude, the government, and I heard from the Honorable Minister, is planning to basically supply maybe 2 to 3 million Ugandans with natural cooking gas. That probably is going to be a separate company. I'm not sure can handle all of that, but that's something that they have time to prepare for. That is a real benefit of having your own source of a critical byproduct of oil with real material consequences for Ugandans, because you can imagine if you put 4 to 5 million Ugandans on affordable natural gas for cooking, for schools, for government institutions, and that sort of thing, it has a net impact on our tree cover, okay? But at the same time, it's a huge import substitution move. And the national oil company, I personally feel, is like the government entity that requires as much support as it possibly can, because the areas where it is operating, as Fred says, are areas where it is like breathing. You need fuel. The future of gas is very important for the environment, and these are areas where I think that we should move in boldly. These concerns about the risks involved, I think these are coming from a sense of panic, in a sense, because you're going into a new area, you're making radical changes, and there's an anticipation amongst some people I've spoken to that we might find ourselves in a ditch. But I would leave that basically to two things. One is the commercial arrangements, and then secondly, the actual logistical arrangements that come with having be a sole importer of these products.
Thank you very much, Angelo. Let me come to Captain Mike. Captain, you are a player in this market. This proposal really is at your doorstep. But let's start with first things first. 50% of what they're saving in storage, you have double that in capacity. How far with the infrastructure to be able to have your company, a player here, both in transportation, having the super tankers, infrastructure for storage there, but also reducing the logistical costs?
Uganda consumes about between 6.5 to 7 million liters of different fuels every day. That is diesel, petrol, jet A1 for aircrafts, and obviously kerosene. The approximately 7 million liters of fuel consumed every day, most of it comes from Kenya. Now, when you look at our capacity in terms of fuel storage, UNOC has a storage capacity of 30 million liters. 20 million liters is for diesel, 10 million liters is for petrol. The capacity in Mahadhi is 70 million liters, which is 2.5 times what UNOC has currently. Secondly, in terms of the trading and the inflows of fuel, Mahadhi has built the capacity to carry 4.5 million liters of fuel at any given time with one barge. And our intent currently is to build 4 barges. Mahadhi currently has one, and the second one will be launched on the 10th into the waters, meaning that we'll now be able to carry approximately 9 million liters of fuel at any given time, which is sufficient to manage Uganda's demands on daily basis. We are 16 kilometers from the airport, meaning that we have the capacity to get jet A1 at a much lower rate to the airport. What is the strategic advantage that we have? Mahadhi reduces the cost of transport in terms of logistics by about 50%. And one barge, which is longer than Nambole Stadium, 120 meters by 23 meters, is able to carry what I've said, 4.5 million liters. What does it mean? We enjoy the economies of scale, making it easier for us to reduce the load on our roads, the pressure on our roads, and also the congestion. The cost of doing business becomes easier and lighter. The cheapest means of transport for fuel anywhere in the world is water, followed by the pipeline, then the railway, then the road. Now, as it were, Mahadhi has built the capacity also to store enough strategic fuels for the country and tradable capacity for the fuel supply chain in the country. We do support the policy shift from G to G. And as you do realize that this was for a long time in the hands of Kenya. And Uganda, being a landlocked country, has got a responsibility and a duty to determine its own sovereign right to have its imports in the manner in which it does require. We've got 2 windows of imports or inflows to the country, and that is Mombasa and Dar es Salaam. The advantage we've had in Mombasa is that it has been a traditional inflow for all our imports, including fuel. What is the strategic advantage of Mombasa as opposed to, say, Dar es Salaam? Is the distance. We are 1,000 kilometers from Mombasa and 1,200 kilometers from Dar es Salaam. So obviously you can see that if you do transport fuel from Dar es Salaam, the costs are slightly higher. And it will mean that the pump price will be slightly higher. You need to know that there are 170 OMCs, oil marketing companies in the country. But only 3 of them, Total, Shell Vivo, and Starbucks control 46% of the supply chain in the country. The other 54, which form about 167 companies, are minor players in the market. But what is important for you to note and for the viewer to consume is that what is the advantage that Uganda is bound to gain from this policy shift? One, we'll have the sovereign right now to have that window of entry of supply from Mombasa, where you have the gate in terms of end-to-end. That's number one. Number two is that you will note that there were other players who were in the market who are taking advantage of the dynamics internally. If I would say, there were many beneficiaries in the supply chain in Kenya when it was the open tender system, the OTX. Now, Kenya moved from OTS, the open tender system, to G2G because of the dynamics and the pressures of Forex. Immediately, President Ruto took over. And he wanted to get fuel from the OPEC countries, particularly from Aramco, from the Gulf, meaning that you got about 3 suppliers to supply GTG on credit. Now, that credit was also had a cost. Uganda, which was paying Forex for it is part of the fuel, did not need that credit. It was paying cash. But the cost of that credit was being passed over to the consumer. So you need to know that there was a cost of the shift from Kenya OTS to G2G. Now, that cost also had other players in the middle. And that's why President Museveni then opted to say, no, as a sovereign country, I'm going to send the Minister of Energy to President Ruto and request that we be given access to have our volumes flow into the country. Now, the advantage which will be gained by Uganda will be possibly 3 or 4. One is that the Forex for payment of fuel will be paid for from Uganda. We will no longer be able to pay Kenya and be able to buttress their Forex revenues in Kenya. Number 2, we may, if we manage the logistics very well, be able to transport fuel slightly at a cheaper rate because we will avoid certain costs that will be embedded in the supply chain. The only problem that we need to do is that, and the challenge, is that we're moving from a single supply, from multiple suppliers to a single supplier. This is where the debate needs to be discussed. But on the side of Mahadi, we, I think, will work very closely with the UNOC to see that fuel comes all the way from Mombasa to Kisumu, because Kenya has got 2 outlets of supply of fuel using the 2 movement systems, and that is through Kisumu and Eldoret. It takes you a bit of time to understand that through Kenya Pipeline, they have 320 million liters storage capacity, which they hold, which was from the former Kenya refinery. The second one is that they have 380 million liters storage capacity, which KPC had built. Now, in terms of the supply chain, the logistics end-to-end downstream has got to be managed by what I would say UNOC. So the supplier will bring and terminate in Mombasa. UNOC will now aggregate through its supply arrangements with the OMCs here, who will pay for the fuel in an account to be determined. And then once they pay through Uganda Revenue Authority, the open account system, they will now be able to access that fuel as OMCs and bring that fuel to Uganda. But there are two factors that my colleagues have been able to labor in, which you need to look at very carefully. Uganda is a net importer of fuel. And the determinants of fuel pricing are all out of global politics and the OPEC, which is a cartel, and it determines the price of fuel at the global level on daily basis, which is driven by factors of demand and supply. Today, Brent oil is at 87.42 per barrel a dollar, according to the New York trading system. And if you note that part of the problems that has raised the cost of fuel in the pump price in Uganda has been geopolitics, which Professor has already been able to elucidate on. What you need to know is that the Ukraine-Russia war did raise the price of fuel. The second one was the reduction of the output by Saudi Arabia by 1 million barrels a day. And they threatened to increase to a much higher level, possibly 3 to 3.5 million barrels a day. That, in the factors of demand and supply, will determine the price. But thirdly, you also need to know, as Doctor has been able to clearly elaborate, is that as Europe moves towards winter now, prices are bound to go up. Then the fourth, but not the least, is this war in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians. All these are neighboring, what you call major suppliers in terms of output. Iran, Saudi Arabia, you may also have countries like Qatar, and so on and so forth. If volatility is determined by that war, and for example, Iran gets into the equation in the Middle East, the price of fuel, currently at 87.42 per barrel, is bound to rise. And it will now be able to imply very heavily on our pump price. But to answer your question as I conclude and in submission, Mahadi has put in a logistical arrangement and a hospitality arrangement in terms of the tank farm to ensure that we can now be able to store up to 70 million liters of fuel. If you looked at the Oil Supply Act of 2003, Chapter 26, you will note that Uganda is supposed to have strategic fuel storage capacity of up to 10 days. Now, currently, at UNOC, we do not have that capacity even for half a day. It is important that we look at our strategic storage and our strategic interests, while at the same time managing what you call tradable fuel. And Mahadi, in terms of its capacity, offers that position and reduces the cost of transportation, that is logistics. And that's why we think that Mahadi is a natural partner to UNOC and government of Uganda as the private player in the market.
Thank you very much. Professor, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. Oil has been discussed at length, but let's come to you and I who put in those cars there. When you look at the global trends, yes, they have a very vast effect they have on us. And when you look at this proposal that has been made by the Minister of Energy, what do you make of it first and foremost? And also, how do Ugandans get value for their money?
Thank you very much, Timothy, and good evening, viewers and colleagues. I think these are very interesting times. And I would want to pick on what Honorable Captain Mukula has just said, because we are moving in a different direction. We are moving from multiple suppliers to a single supplier. That is likely to have challenges. Politically, I am one who would actually support government being in charge of critical areas such as oil, other than leaving it to many industrial players of the market. Because we've seen ever since we went the neoliberal way, the market has failed at certain things and has performed very well in certain things. When we had the health crisis with COVID, we saw that the market could not provide certain things. So when it comes to the oil sector, and what government is planning to do with the oil sector as the sector from which they're going to have several spin-offs to energize this economy, to grow this economy, it's important that government is in charge. But they are also going to, while that is right politically for them to be in charge, there are things we need to be aware of. One is, how are we going to shift from the tradition of multiple providers to a single provider? And now when we have this sole provider, won't it be guilty of all the other things for which privatization and multiple providers were introduced into the market in the first place? That government would fix prices in the past with its companies. There was a lot of violation of certain market principles or trade principles, in that the way these companies were being run was not in a very efficient way companies would be run. And privatization or liberalization was supposed to introduce certain economic principles to make these companies viable. And that's why some of them actually, when they were privatized, some of them did better initially than they had been in the state before. So it is good politically and strategically that government controls this sector, other than leaving it to whoever has the power to provide. But managing that process is going to be, we have to be cautious and plan effectively on how well that's going to be managed, to shield it from the reasons for which the liberalization of the economy occurred in the first place, and all those tendencies that come with having a monopoly. And like, I think, is it Angelo who said, or it is Doctor who said about, it's not even just the oil alone. It's not going to be just the fuel alone. It seems to be that they are providing, they are going to control or have the monopoly over all the other oil products. What I'm not clear of is whether it happens in what is being imported or even what's going to be produced. I think that needs to be clarified. So it is very important strategically. But now when you come to the common user, the day-to-day person on the ground really doesn't need to know who is owning what. What the person on the ground relates with is going to the pump, and is the pump price up or is it low? Okay? So regardless of who owns it, if the pump price keeps up, then there's going to be a challenge because it will not matter. And I know we have very many countries where the oil sector is run very well, but we also have examples where the oil sector has been run badly. You have a country like Nigeria, which produces its own oil, but suffers a lot of scarcity and suffers a lot of high prices. So what is not working there? Of course, you'll be told because in the 60s they wanted a refinery and that was voted out or booted, and now they end up taking all their fuel to the Scandinavian countries for processing. So it's the whole transportation issue. By the time it goes and the time it comes back, it doesn't matter whether you're the producer. So it goes back to what the other panels have said, this will reduce costs, it will reduce the transportation. But all of those will make sense when the person goes to the pump and the price is low. And that's why there's also this fear of the monopoly, because if you have a single company monopolizing the production, won't this company fix the prices? Okay? Since no one else can come in, so that means there are no market forces of supply and demand. So if you have a monopoly, won't this monopoly, whether it's a national monopoly or an external monopoly, won't it fix the prices? And in case the prices are fixed, then what happens? So bottom line, the issue is at the end of the day, when the person goes, the person will relate with whatever we are debating by way of price. If the price is high, it doesn't matter what the minister's policy has said. So we hope that from the creation of UNOC, actually, and how people have argued here that costs are going to come down, we hope that the end user will also get it lower. But if it continues going up, then it doesn't make sense.
So where does it leave the future of the oil sector, especially in Uganda?
Well, beyond UNOC, I think the oil sector has been progressing well in terms of, but it will require many things. I think there's been a lot of investment. Like even the small video clip you showed, there's a lot of investment in that area. So it is, in a way, actually becoming a trigger for certain developments. So it will grow, but we have to be ready to, one, put in a lot of infrastructure. I know we've been trying, and I'm not one who follows the oil sector very well, but I know there was, there's been tallow, there has been, I don't know, whatever. At one point we had a case in the UK, which I think we won. So what happens with the oil sector to make it productive? One, as members have said, we are unfortunate that we are landlocked. So that comes with its own challenges. But if we can find a way of securing the right investments to be able to drill the oil in a cost-effective manner, to have the refineries, if at all, if it were possible, we would have the refineries in the country. But maybe that is not possible. But also you have to think about other things like, do we have the capacity? We have the engineers. I know many courses have been developed for teaching people in oil and gas and all those kinds of things. But I remember one time attending a symposium in Makerere, the engineering unit, I think it was 2016, and the complaint was not the lack of the high-skilled people in the oil sector. It was lack of basic manpower, people to drive forklifts, people to move this, people to move that. And maybe it also seems that when we've gone into university production or focusing on university education, higher education, we've forgotten the vocationals. So if we have the right infrastructure and we have the right skill sets, both at high level but also at vocational level, that should be able to develop. I think for me, the oil sector should not be abandoned. It is one that actually can have so many spin-offs in terms of the different products. So there should be commitment, including government investment, in making the oil sector work, including getting the right investors in case we have to get external lending. I think that should be made to work. So all the comments we are raising should not be, the conclusion should not be that we do nothing about the oil sector. I think these are all being raised with the spirit of making it work and profitable and avoiding the pitfalls that others have fallen into. So that at the end of the day, you don't end up with the oil sector leading to environmental pollution, excluding people. So like this question we set out, so how do we make this profitable, viable, but also inclusive of the different populations we have?
Thank you. Ali, let me come to you. This proposal is quite interesting. Why now? Why are you proposing this now? Because it's not like the Petroleum Supplies Act does not have some of the things you're talking about. It talks about regulation authority, it talks about prices, you have a reserve price. So what are you really solving?
Okay, thank you. And I would like to thank the previous speakers, especially Captain and the doctor's point of the importance and the support, especially in terms of partnership, the strategic partnership for UNOC. What you need to note is that the old law as it is did not give the minister powers, the old Supply Act, to appoint UNOC to do that role which is being given in this new proposed amendment. And what is triggering this is what Captain Mukula said, is that there was an OTS, open tender system in Kenya, where all players would come and the imported products, you go to that open tender system, and all these other 170 people would go and access through that. What has now shifted, Kenya has made a policy shift and gone to what is called G2G. And Kenya has negotiated an agreement with the government of Saudi Arabia with their national oil company, which is the equivalent of Uganda National Oil Company, which is called Saudi Aramco.
Sorry, Ali, let me interject. Section 26 and Section 30, especially Section 30, talks about the powers the minister has.
Yes.
The commissioner consults the minister
Yes.
on regulation of prices,
Yes.
on regulation, having a regulation authority.
Yes.
So when you say she has no power,
Yes.
and this is already in the Act,
Yes.
aren't you reinventing the wheel?
No, the powers, I said, for import into Uganda, not for products destined to Uganda. So when you say import in Uganda, those powers stop at our boundary. The law now is saying for products destined to Uganda, meaning that the powers now for UNOC is to go beyond our border and go to Kenya at the cost and be able to buy from there. And actually, that's the clarity I wanted to make here, that it's not going to be a monopoly, that there are 170 companies are not going to be importing. No, they will be importing. But the powers now being given to UNOC are the original powers that the government of Kenya had at the border. Because before, all the products, as Honorable Mukula has said, we would go to the Kenyan system. So we are now authorizing UNOC to go to Kenya, which they have done, get a license that side, and then short circuit that G2G arrangement between Kenya. But the relationship that remains on the importation in Uganda with all these other players, including the logistical players like Mahathi, that will remain. So we are just moving and empowering our entity to say that instead of the business that Kenya was doing, please go and do it for us. And then any markup that comes out of that business will then come to us. All the other macro advantages, including the forex stabilization, including the security of supply, because right now you would be dealing with, let me say, Saudi Aramco. The structure we have is that the Kenyan government has been dealing with Saudi Aramco, then we go deal with the Kenyan government. So we are now saying, UNOC, you go.
Direct.
What UNOC has done now to answer the capacity issues, because it's a private company, is to go out and also get an entity to strategically deal with that entity in order to manage at that border. That's the first one. Now, the second is that for people to know that the oil project, which is for extracting our oil and refining, is going on. And that's the most, actually for me, the most exciting and most important. Because what you need to ask is, when first oil starts, it is the reverse. Because
let's go back to a point you've made. You've said
Yes.
we are going to be dealing with a private company.
And it's
What private
UNOC.
company is that UNOC is going to be dealing with?
UNOC has gotten a private entity. It is in the government statement that the minister has said.
It is going to deal with Vitol.
Vito as a strategic partner. Yes.
Which agreement has been signed by our government?
No, that is UNOC now.
UNOC
the,
has
the
signed-
law deals with UNOC, empowers UNOC. But
So
UNOC
UNOC
as a
has-
trader goes out and it can deal with Mahathi, it can deal with Vito, it can deal with any other entity. But the law at that level, at a policy level, what government is moving is to say we are empowering our son or any entity that we shall choose, and that is what is in the law, to go to the border for any product that is destined in Uganda. You are empowered now to go and deal with it at the cost. Then these people, players here, instead of going to Kenya so that it gets all those advantages, you then go and deal with our son. That's the policy shift. And when you're talking about monopoly, that's why I wanted to clarify with Professor, is that it is not that UNOC is now going to be distributing everything. No, it is that where was originally these 170 getting these products. The original structure is that they would go on a
Kenya.
Kenyan system.
Yeah.
Now we are attacking the Kenyan system and saying, no, we are putting our son there, and our son will be dealing with Saudi Aramco or Dubai or wherever, and then our people here will be
go to
dealing
UNOC.
with our son at that
So
point.
the sun is the supplier.
The son is
UNOC.
UNOC. It is-
UNOC, the sun is the supplier,
it replaces the position of the Kenyan government.
which they become the supplier.
The Kenyan government was the one which was dealing with the supplier, which is Saudi Arabia, that G2G. So it is now moving in that space.
to become the supplier.
Whatever word you want to use, but it is going into that
think,
space.
Let me help
Yes.
him here. What has happened here is that UNOC is going to work with Vital. That's what the minister's document very clearly elucidates on. Now, Vital is also the owner of VTTI in Mombasa. Vital is also the owner of Vivo, Shell Vivo, 100%.
In Uganda.
That's what you've got to understand.
Does Mahathir deal straight away with Vital?
What we are going to do is work with UNOC, because UNOC here comes in as an intermediary on behalf of the government of Uganda. And what you want to note is that in the trade that was there under OTS, even possibly G2G in Kenya, what was obtaining was that the OMCs in Kenya, who had the capacity and the means to play, sometimes even whole fuel in Kenya, out of the import, say, of 100%, the Kenyan OMCs could retain up to 60%. Now, in the middle, they would earn approximately, say, about $40 per cubic liter. Now, if you aggregate this and pass it on to UNOC for building capacity under the oil fund, UNOC now will be earning close to between $8 to $9 million per month. That could easily translate to $96 million, nearly $100 million, which was remaining in Kenya. I know you get my point.
I get your point, Captain. And let's come back, because I want to ask what happens to the other 100 plus companies, especially what effect happens to them in this chain of business there. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll come back to Professor and Captain Angelo and Dr. Fred to especially tell us, you know, privatization, monopoly, what does this mean? Listen more after this break.
Jovia ng'oyolekera ku lugendo luno olw'obulamu nkuwa ekirabo eky'amaanyi agataziizibwa, amaanyi okulabibwa n'okuwulirwa mu mawanga ag'ewala ennyo, okutuuka buli wamu nga yadde togenzeeyo, ensi yonna ng'ekuli mu ngalo. Okutambula mu biseera n'okumanya buli kimu na okumanyibwa. Jovia, kino kye kirabo kyange gy'oli.
Tewali kumu ku ki ky'osobola okukola ku mukutu nnandameggwa ogwa MTN.
Metu Bus Industries Namambe, the manufacturers of buses for transporters, schools, tour operators and special purpose vans. Metu Bus Industries offers a range of buses known for safety, comfort and reliability. Depending on your needs, a bus can simply be a point A to point B people mover, with just seats or a special design that includes a restroom, power outlet, Wi-Fi, television and a refreshment center. Buy your buses from Metu and support industrialization of Uganda.
Ndeka wena mulamu. Otyo. Mbakemye rubona. Mubaire muri kolati.
Ndide kulagirira ono ngeri gyebawayo kumbaga ya mwene ngwakozesa momope.
Eisimu eriwa gye buliko.
Tola yesimu wena nakobya ironi geisimu tobulira.
Eisimu nyingi.
Niga sita ndala mukaga echano sita isatu otewe ashi onige yes. Balese chawo.
Balese merchant code gye balisaba. Mama kadi bati.
Kayo buzono wa kitamu nsanvu tamu ensanvu. Nsanvu mirundi esatu.
Balisaba.
Tamu esente lewe.
Amount. Baleta mobile money.
Mobile money.
Bali kunsaba pini.
Ebuta utamu piniyo.
Iwa imwe
sasula aye baba embaga ya mwene mwekuwoniza.
Pay or shop with MTN Momo and get cashback every week. It's free of charge. Use the Momo app or dial *165*3#.
Metu Bus Industries Namambe, the manufacturers of buses for transporters, schools, tour operators and special purpose vans. Metu Bus Industries offers a range of buses known for safety, comfort and reliability. Depending on your needs, a bus can simply be a point A to point B people mover, with just seats or a special design that includes a restroom, power outlet, Wi-Fi, television and a refreshment center. Buy your buses from Metu and support industrialization of Uganda.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. Even as we get into this last leg, my name is Timothy Nyangweso. I'm joined by quite a number of panelists here, and we're discussing everything oil and the fuel at the pump and what effects it has on you and I. I'll be getting into some of your feedback in a short while, but let me get to the people here. Dr. Fred, now that we have discovered where the monopoly is during the break, and also talked about the 3 Kenyan companies that are being eliminated from there, it has its pros and cons. When we look at the liberalization of this market here, what pickle are we putting ourselves in as a country?
I think, as you said, in economics, we say the last really extreme thing you don't want to have is a monopoly. And a monopoly can be created by law. It can be created by who has muscle to keep others out and grab that huge market share. The others are playing in, but really peripheral. Because like he mentioned, 4 companies are controlling 44%. 3 are controlling 46%. We have the same thing in the banking sector. You have 26 banks, 25, whatever number they are, but really they are top 6 that take up the lion's share, almost 75, almost 80%. So when you have those kinds of arrangements, you want to be worried because there can be a cartel of OPEC. Now here you have a problem where Vital, and has been mentioned, may not be in the law, but really the gentleman's agreement, the communication from government, is Vital is going to build the capacity of UNOC along the way. Now Vital is definitely going to be where you had a G2G. Kenya is talking with the government of Saudi Arabia. Now Vital will be talking with a certain government. So you have replaced the government with a private sector, Vital, who will have a profit motive. And they must get their portion at that point before they even sell to UNOC or hand over to UNOC. They would have gotten their thing. Now they are also in the country as well through Vivo. So when they enter here, and this is a large control of that market, they can decide to follow through and give Vivo, which is themselves, an advantage over the others. It may or may not happen. Again, its regulation needs to come in there to make sure how do you control this fellow from creating an interest at the global level and follow it through at the national level. Those are exposed risks that you really want to be watching in those spaces. Now, Kenya government has been buying for itself and for Uganda. That means you are buying bulk. It gives you some kind of advantage to be seen, because sometimes in the market you want to be seen. And then you can have some negotiation. Of course, we have already said the barrel price is fixed. But now when you get to negotiate with the government of Saudi Arabia, and you are taking some sizable chunk, you possibly get to be seen larger, and moreover you are dealing with Aramco, which is a Saudi government arrangement. You can even play a political card and say, but you guys, why don't you? So all those benefits, we are going to sheriff them out here. But I think the main thing that Honorable Captain Mike has put in the table, the elephant in the room, is this a potential $100 million that comes to UNOC. A positive thing. You want to bring that home. But you want to say, how are the others going to take it? Are they going to take it lying down? Because they were in Kenya and they are losing this to Uganda. And trade is war, as we always say. Trade is never a calm thing. It's negotiated. It's sometimes exactly. It is negotiated. It is sometimes war. So how are these Kenyan players going to take it? They might disadvantage us in one way or another. They might put something in there and say, now, Kenya government, we're still going to be using the Kenyan infrastructure. What are they going to charge us? So there are a number of things that are out there that may still need political discussions. That's why I don't want us to simply say, we have amended the law, UNOC now go. UNOC would still need a political cover. So I would still want to see President Museveni have continuous conversations with President Ruto, because oil is politics. And that's why sometimes I look at Uganda trying to say, I have my oil. I'm like, no, you can't say you have your oil. It's like I have my school, I still have to comply with the Ministry of Education guidelines. They can close it. So the oil space we are playing in has its political players who are big. With our $2 billion, $40 billion worth after 20 years, what are you talking about? People can even shut you out technically, because we are still begging them to come and co-invest with us. So they can still decide and say, Uganda, you signed an FID, we are not going to proceed with this arrangement. We have seen potential funders walk away. Some of them will claim all things environmental, but they are still funding other people in fossil fuel. So that becomes not a point. So there's a lot of politics that surrounds this particular sector, which we need to understand now at the regional level, because we have ruffled some potentially $100 million from a neighbor who badly needs dollars. The Kenyan economy needs to find $2 billion to pay off their Eurobond next year in June. Now here you are picking off something from them. The Kenyan currency is losing. The Kenyan currency is losing value because the dollars are running out. So how are they going to take it political? And Kenya sometimes behaves as a united itself. They will say, Ugandan, you have aflatoxin, don't come here. Ugandan milk, I don't want it here. So how are they going to take this is a situation I still want to watch as we play in this space. So it's not just about the law. It's not about you, Uganda, will have our sovereignty. We can determine our own man. Kenya is still on the eastern side, and we are on the western side. And sadly, but not so bad, the Indian Ocean is on the other side of Kenya. And that's where our oil comes from.
Sticking with you, what does this mean for our foreign exchange, both in reserves and what we get in?
Of course, that's another area. If the $100 million comes through UNOC, it would add to our foreign exchange. But there is something you put in before that comes out. I still want to see somebody tell me how UNOC is going to be funded, because it is entering into a space. Those three Kenyan entities and players were investing in that space. What were they investing in? What is the strategy for UNOC to get money to invest in? That is one side you want to look at. But also we know that sometimes government companies, and that's why we had the liberalization, to bring in private sector efficiency. The conversation that Captain here is talking about, when he wants to make a decision, the decision will be made. Now here you will be coming in and UNOC still need to consult the Attorney General's office, consult I don't know who, write to this one. Those kinds of things can actually kill out government. Nigeria, by the way, has so many refineries. None works.
They have 17 small refineries.
None is working. Reason? Inefficiencies, corruption, mismanagement, all sorts of things. Or whenever government comes in, I want to keep my eye open even when I'm sleeping. I'm like, now who is running this? Is it going to be an efficient entity? We have had the UPDF pull of certain things that had failed. Of course, are also them struggling because they are using a government budget. So when government comes in, you cannot just go and say, I need some $7 million, I have found a bank to give it to me. That's government borrowing. You need to go through a process, you have to appear in parliament, you have to appear, by then the opportunity is gone. As I said, oil needs to flow like you're breathing. So when these guys have issues, they know how they find their money, either Stanbic or Citibank or wherever they go, and it keeps flowing. Including, you can go to Aramco and say, please finance me. How do you pay URA taxes? If URA is saying, before you pay, don't flow. They know how they sort it out. What is UNOC going to do? I really want to see that seamless, because for me, we are in a space that has no margin of error.
Ali has a response for you.
Yeah, I think from, and I will stick because, as you said, I came here in the shoes of the minister, and the ministry has issued a statement on this, and from that record, it is very clear that the entity that UNOC, now, I said we do the debate first at layer one at the policy level. UNOC is going to Kenya and to replace the G2G in Kenya, and it is going on as a son of the government of Uganda, as our baby. The second then is that its commercial structure, how is it being enabled? That commercial structure answers some of the questions the doctor is asking, and it is that the partner coming on board is supposed to undertake some of these guarantees, the financial guarantees that relate to this transaction, including building the capacity of the storage terminals here in Jinja to increase them, and the what we call the Kampala storage terminal, the commercial venture that is coming. So it's a two prolonged approach. One, the revenue stream, but two, to relieve UNOC from some of these financial, and government from some of the financial obligations that would arise from this obligation. And the third, the security of supply, is that it is also inbuilt with buffer. There are requirements that what Captain was saying, that there are more reserves that are kept, but also including in other countries, maybe like in Tanzania, to make sure that you can cover this. So the commercial structure is a matter that all the players now are going to get involved in, of course consistent with what you call the competitions law, which is already currently in place, to make sure that there is no monopoly. All the players now getting into this field, like Shell or Vivo, is working at arm's length at that level. But I think the issue is to separate the policy line of saying Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, G2G, there, UNOC, and then the commercial structure that relate to this. Because once UNOC is enabled, it's a commercial entity. Actually, part of this, it answers the bureaucracy and so on, because it's an entity. It will go out in the market and look for strategic partners that it can work with, who can meet some of these financial obligations.
Doctor, I think that's what you want to add to that.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to add before I get to Angela.
Yes.
Some of the things that Ali will not tell you, a 5-year agreement is already there.
Yep.
They are going to do a buffer in Uganda and Tanzania, which is going to stop the disruption. 320 million metric tons of fuel in PG, a facility that they're going to fund, and finances are going to be given to UNOC. What does this mean for our debt? What does this mean for UNOC? What interest is here?
Because Vital is not a charity. Whatever financial support they extend to UNOC is coming at a cost. So that you want to look at it. And that cost, Sarah is going to face it.
Exactly.
That's why I want to say, are we stabilizing? Are we lowering the price? Let's not bring in expectations. I would love to see the detail, because every law that goes and whatever amendments you want to do, they must have a certificate of financial implications.
Yes.
And I am hoping that the Ministry of Finance was given all this detail of what is implied within this signature.
Let me give you even more interesting thing.
Yes.
Our first strategic tanks existing now are in Jinja, 100+ kilometers away from what you call the deep market. Fuel is consumed deepest within 65 kilometers from the center, and that is the post office. 65 kilometers has over 65% of the consumption of fuel of Uganda. Take that into note. So if you are to bring fuel and store it in Jinja and then offload it to the tanks, then transport that to Kampala, that's a double cost. That fuel at the pump price will be high. And that's number one. Number two, if you move it to our strategic fuel storage tanks in the Mpigi Buloba, which is 80 kilometers away, and offload it there, then bring it to Kampala, you also know that that will add the pump price. That's number two. And that's why we did a comprehensive study to say that we need, as Mahadi, to be very near the market, 16 kilometers from Entebbe and within a distance from Kampala. And we're able to store enough fuel to run the country. And that's why the investment, and that's why it is important for you to note that in the play of the oil market in the downstream now, we are the largest investor at $270 million approximately in the country, higher than even UNOC. So we need to be in the center of the discussion to partner with the UNOC at a zero cost to government of Uganda. You need to understand that because it's got no tax bearing in terms of revenue to the country, in terms of taxpayers spending money for the country. We buffer that. We mitigate those costs. And we had, at a certain point in the discussion with government at a high level, proposed that we could also move and have storage in our tanks, both for strategic and tradable positions, so that the country can have reserves, but at the same time have capacity to replenish itself on a regular basis. And we had proposed this with E3. But that put aside, let's go into the reality. And this is why I need you to look at. From post-independence position, we have not had local players in the oil sector, especially private sector. If you looked at the 5 major companies which were existing post-independence, Esso was British, Agip was Italian, Shell was Dutch, Caltex was British. Now, if you look at the entire framework, it was in the hands of the foreign monopolies and the big players. My interest is to see, as a patriot, to see national growth in terms of participation of the local actors. Currently, the policy shift is going to sink many of the OMCs out of the 170. You will see that many of them will go and fed off, will go bankrupt or will close shop. The same applies to Kenya on the other side. And you're going to see that the market share of the main OMCs and some of the low players is going to be reduced. And if you looked at the current lead players in the oil sectors, OMCs, Total is French, Shell Vivo is Dutch, Swiss-Dutch, but really Swiss now. If you look at Starbucks, is Kenyan. They control 46% of the oil trade. Now, look at another interesting thing. Most of the fuel which is brought has been transported to the country has been over 90 or 95% or 92% of the fuel transport into the country is paid for in foreign currency. Most of these trucks are either Kenyan, Somali, DRC Congo registered in South Sudan because of taxes. Uganda has got no stake, and you pay this in dollars. In terms of forex mitigation and in terms of import subsidy, this definitely is an outflow, it's a leakage. While we are plugging this with UNOC, you must now look at the other alternative, and that's why President Museveni has been talking about using the lake. Fuel is traded in cash. It's not like milk or bananas. Yes. Fuel is traded from end to end cash. And you must have the muscle to be able to trade in fuel. Now, Mahadi has been able to mitigate this by putting aside the forex component. You pay for your fuel transportation in Uganda shillings. This saves Uganda government from the export of forex. Now, these mitigative factors is what the private sector comes into play. Much as we are now having government of Uganda coming in as UNOC, it is important, and I put that as a rider, that you involve the private sector in the play, in ensuring that if you want to reduce the pump price, play with the private sector, work with the private sector.
Angelo, let me come to you. And I'll get to Vito later. A law made in 2003, 20 years later is being amended. What is the lifespan of a law for it to really justify amendment?
There are no rules for this. Mr. Ali Sekatawa is the lawyer here. I think the decision on whether or not to make a law today and amend it tomorrow depends on who the decision maker is. There are no rules there to say that you need a law to last so long before you amend it. It's a fiction. Look, I think that first of all, like I said at the beginning, the policy direction is the right one. We can work at the details. There's been some debate here about, you know, what happens when you centralize a supply via this arrangement that that UNOC is being mandated. First of all, UNOC, by the way, is a private company. It's a registered under the Companies Act. It's a government-mandated company, yes, but in fact, it's a private player. It carries the commercial interests of the government in various aspects of the oil sector. It's an investor like the other companies in the pipeline. It has a stake in the upstream as well. So it's a private company. I don't want you to lose it.
Owned by
Pardon?
government.
So should
Yeah,
the
but I'm
private
saying that in terms of its rules, okay, it is a commercial entity. And this is nothing that people should worry about, because in any case, government-mandated companies, national oil companies, they dominate the global oil trade. You know, the global oil trade is only 30% run by companies, 28% actually, like Total and Shell and others. Majority of the business of oil, 70% is done by national oil companies. And this is important actually for everyone to understand, that governments dominate global oil trade, and that's why geopolitics is essentially a huge factor. Secondly, you look at aspects like refining. I think a study recently done, if I'm not mistaken, within the government of Uganda here that profiled refineries in the world. Did you know that it's only in Africa where you've got a private run refinery by a private sector player, and it's in Nigeria? It's Dangote. Most refineries in the world are state-run refineries. Okay? So the government is a major player, and me, I personally don't entertain the fiction that government-run entities essentially come with inefficiency, as has been talked about here, and that when a government entity enters, you know, an area where the private sector is dominant, that somehow that you should be afraid. By the way, I mean, I am not disagreeing with Dr. Muhumza, but a lot of the studies and a lot of the commentary about the failure of state-run companies in Uganda in our history does not take into account that when those failures happened, you know, the factors that are driving the collapse of those state-run corporations, Coffee Marketing Board, Lint, and others, were basically political conditions that made it impossible for those companies to operate. It had little to do with their inefficiencies. In other words, if you're Lint Marketing Board in the middle of the conflict between 1979 and 1985, what kind of efficiency are you talking about there, Timothy? Okay? And also I live in I live most of my time in the Middle East. Okay? If you are in the UAE basically is run by state monopolies. ADNOC is a state monopoly.
I think that's the real point we are saying.
Yeah.
When you say government run, governments are not homogeneous.
Yeah.
They are governments that are really out to deliver something. A Chinese government, you play around with corruption, you know where you are headed.
Yeah, but Fred, let me make
So
let me make
for
a
me,
final
that's why
point.
I say it's not that the other government owns, so this government must own.
No.
As long as governments are not homogeneous, I want first to say, which government are we talking about? African governments, I'm not going to compare them with some others, especially in Asia. That's my point.
So, but let me make the point actually. Let me put it like this. The ambition of Uganda in the oil sector, okay, is distinguishable on this African continent of ours. You know, Nigeria discovered oil, started exploring in the 1920s, discovered oil commercial quantities in the late 50s. By the time Uganda had independence here, Nigeria was on to production. Okay? Uganda discovered oil 2006 when we were first talking about this. 20 years later, we have just been preparing for a run. Okay? There are many of these mistakes that you won't see in our oil sector. That's me, I think, is a fact. Final point I wanted to make is that the commercial arrangements that the National Oil Company is pursuing that answer some of the questions, the fears that we have here, I think must be put to the test. Okay? And I think the support that UNOC needs is that it should pursue that ambition, but demonstrate it in prudent and accountable ways. I want to make one final point. Like, I'm in the investment space myself, at least at the policy level. I can understand why Vitol would be generous in its commercial arrangements with UNOC. And do you know the reason, Timothy? The real jewel in the crown of the petroleum sector in Eastern Africa is petroleum production and refining here in Uganda, in the Hoima area. If you're seated on the board of Vitol, okay, and you're generally making your money from downstream, the future market you want to be allied with is when Uganda is exporting crude, but also refining that crude, okay? You want to be in that place where you say, okay, if I am strategically in that market, especially as a partner of the National Oil Company that carries the commercial interest of the government of Uganda, when you start refining your crude, okay, and we are in the kind of conditions now to supply this regional market of 300 million people, okay, even put an option for Kenya no longer to rely on imported crude or their G2G arrangement with Saudi Aramco or others. They have oil coming from here. That is a smart investment to make in UNOC for Vitol at this time. And therefore you can stagger your costs because you're making a long-term investment. And you also want to make sure that the partner that you're dealing with is in a condition to make sure that that investment pays off. And that partner is the Uganda National Oil Company.
Thank you very much.
In fact, that's why we are saying, very briefly, that we have put in, Mahadi has put in an arrangement where, for example, if you have the refinery, which is due to be announced this month by the minister, and if we have the agreement signed, that commitment to have the refinery, we are putting a provision to have the pipeline connected, say, from Buloba to our point, so that we can reverse pump this to Kenya, to Tanzania, and the entire region. The idea is that Uganda should become a hub, a strategic hub for the supply chain. As soon as we have these 65 or 60 million barrels that will be able to output, 60,000 barrels that will be able to output and refine. This is what we had looked at in terms of the comprehensive study to make Uganda one of the key, or what you call a connection to the supply chain of fuel in the region.
Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's even getting more interesting, although I've not been following oil very much. First of all, I think, Angela, we need to know that oil was discovered at the same time in Nigeria and Uganda, but the British decided that for Nigeria they will extract and Uganda will be zoned for agriculture. So there are all records around that. But going back to your argument, which is very well, that actually governments should lead these things, I agree with that. Particularly for nationalistic and patriotic reasons, government should control this. But when you read, and I just Googled down a few things in Reuters, why then aren't we giving this to a Ugandan company like Mahadi? Why are we giving it to Vitol? Because Vitol is not Ugandan, okay? So first and foremost, I wanted to know, and maybe Ali will help me with this, Why, for example, did we need to form UNOC? Is it to get the millions of dollars that have had being discussed here? Or is it to ensure that the end user, who is a Ugandan, gets a better deal? From the discussion so far on the panel, it looks like, well, there was such money which was there which we needed to grab, so we have grabbed it. But we're also going to capitalize. So in any case, it's not going to be cheaper to run UNOC, at least in the first years. So which means for me at the pump, which is the only interface I have with oil, the pump price will be as high or may even be higher because we have to still build UNOC, but maybe we are not even getting into that space necessarily to bring down prices, but because the Kenyans have been taking it, so can we take it? That is one. The other thing is, if we want a national player, the state to own this chain, why then Vitol? Or are we trying to say that there's no Ugandan oil player, okay, maybe a private company, but a Ugandan oil player to do this kind of thing, so that we do the nationalism properly? And that's why maybe Captain Kumukulu is talking about more deeper things, work with the shilling, avoid exporting the dollar, talk about the pipeline from Buloba, I don't know, to wherever, and make a hub. You see, when you have nationals driving these things, they have different sentiments from the players, as you said, because Vitol is looking at the downstream, so it's being strategically. Actually, you sound more like you are an advocate for Vitol, or a PR for Vitol, because you are telling us why Vitol would want to locate itself in that space. What we want to know is why are we having UNOC, and what is going to change for the consumer. But also, if we are to go nationalist, can we have nationalists driving this process? Except if we can comfortably say here that there are no Ugandans in that space who can do this. So personally, I think maybe it will help me to answer, why did we get there? Is it just for the money?
There has been a biological determination that Ugandans cannot trade in fuel.
No, of course not.
But okay, so that is one thing. So mainly what I want to know, is it just to get the money, how we capitalize, or was it for the private user? But also when we say government, can we have government? Because at one point we hear UNOC is government, then we hear UNOC is a private player, and if UNOC is a private player, then why are we giving it a comparative advantage over other players in the market? So I think the message, and when you read, and there's so many things here about UNOC and the Vitol, and how Uganda is giving away sole rights and monopolies to this Vitol company, they are all there online by routers and whatever. I just Googled here and I got it. So I think we need to send out a consistent message, rather than just play PR. And I think for me the subject is a good subject. And for me, I'm a believer in governments owning these things for political reasons, for strategic reasons, and for nationalistic interests. Okay? But can we have Ugandans in charge?
The challenge we're having, Timothy, is that we are not operating at the same level of knowledge of the oil sector in Uganda. That's the first thing.
Yeah, that's why we have this kind of panel stream from the public.
So I actually read the strategy for UNOC, the original one done by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then the one done by the Petroleum Exploration and Production Department last week. But I also know UNOC has got a new strategy now that it's pursuing. National oil companies are by design created to anchor the growth of the petroleum sector of a particular country. So you have, they are not really purely commercial. Commercial is, the benefit you get from oil is just one of the tributaries of benefit you get from the national oil company. National oil companies are strategic in a sense that they can guarantee security of supply. If you're thinking about some of the top national oil companies in the world, such as the one of Statoil in Norway, and the model that we are following here in Uganda, they are not only just commercially successful, but you build a top-class petroleum sector, which includes the ability of your nationals to explore the oil, to find the oil, to extract the oil, to sell the oil. Those are like multiple industries. Exactly. And the petrochemicals industry itself has got its many other benefits. Now, that is essentially the vision of UNOC. UNOC is basically a driver of, it's a partner of change, okay? But it is building that capacity in the oil and gas sector. So, Sarah, the way I would answer it is to say that, look, we can get into all the details about the sector, but essentially, the way you retain utmost benefits from an oil and gas sector is if you have your own anchor. That
and
anchor,
I agree with that.
the anchor is
But you keep calling it private.
No,
It's a
the way
private
the law has been designed, maybe Ali
he made it actually very state, and it was good to follow.
I said it's a government
Then he
mandated,
privatized
a
it.
government mandated company.
Okay, let me bring in Ali to respond, and then come to Captain.
I think Professor, UNOC was created in 2013 as a statutory corporation or company. Owned the shareholders, Minister of Energy and Minister of Finance.
Okay, that's fine.
2, it is, as Angelo is saying, a commercial entity that is supposed to operate under the Companies Act. So after creating it by law, we release it the way you release a bird to the air, and you say, go and trade. But by its nature, because it is young, as you said, we are 50 years old in this, 50 years late in this industry.
Okay.
And all the other players also have their babies whom they have built for all the, I can give you an example. CNOOC, China National Oil Company. It is here because it was birthed by China for over 30 years. It operated in China, now it comes and gets a license here. So we are trying to build UNOC, nurture it to a mother, as a mother, cover it,
and then agree with that.
Yes, and then we let it start. And it has started in the refinery. It is 40%, pipeline 15%. We just gave it a license, as the ministry gave it a license, Kasurubani, okay? It is now operating the Ginger Reserve. Now it's being taken from here to say, can you go and operate for us in the space that the Kenyans have been operating? Go to the coast so that a buyer here comes and finds you. And then UNOC, as a commercial entity, says, okay, but when I go there, I am just 7 years old, so I might not have the muscle. I am going to get a commercial partner. How they get it, it is their commercial boardroom.
We can't take a Uganda.
They can, but Captain can tell you how much it costs in a day for you to buy import oil products in this country.
So in short, UNOC wouldn't have gotten a Ugandan supply.
No.
It has to be
what I'm trying to say is you need to look at how much. First of all, maybe Captain gave you the amount, and I think in their commercial evaluation, because this company, from what I've read, is close to 500 billion in terms of its profile. I don't know whether we have a company, because actually
he said his company is equally.
Okay, you will explain. But
allow me bring in Captain Mukula. Captain, when we look at what you have invested, over $200 million in this, and 2 super tankers coming in, about 9 million liters there. How are you going to leverage on this new policy? How are you going to be able to make money, because you're not a charity, as Dr. Mhumza said, in this space, because you seem like you have a supplier and you're almost going to be a retailer?
No, we are not a retailer. We want to remain exactly logistics and hospitality, so that our tank farm remains a hub for UNOC and for OMCs to be able to manage their supply chain by taking advantage of a cheaper inflow of fuel. Let me give you an example. If you looked at, for example, in 2008-7, when Kenya had a crisis, you recall that our fuel tankers were burnt and we did not have fuel, the economy overheated. within a very short time, the exchange rate of the shilling against the dollar went from 230 to 360, where it has stabilized now. But it had a major impact on our economy. What am I saying? Fuel is a cost pusher. It is very sensitive. It's like Forex. So if you are managing fuel, you need to be very careful and alive to quick decisions, both taking into account the global implications and the global changes, the price changes, the projections. And that's why you find that some people had what you call futures, buying fuel in advance. Now, what am I saying? You need to understand that now that we are in play and we are prepared to offer a much cheaper inflow in terms of logistics of the supply chain end to end, pipeline to the barge, and because of the economies of scale, we are cheaper. Ugandans can take advantage of this and make sure that the pump price is cheaper. Two, what is the advantage that UNOC benefits from this? And that's why you need to look at the key takeaways. And when you look at the tick list of our strategic advantage as placing UNOC into game, one is that this money which was remaining in Kenya and has made many people millionaires and some billionaires now comes home. Now when it comes home, that money goes to government rather than to the pockets of the private players. And UNOC will now, and that's why the president has guided, that you can have now the oil fund that can now intervene in certain strategic areas to make sure that we can now buttress. Part of this money as the oil fund can now be used to buy fuel and stock it for strategic interests as a landlocked country. That is an advantage. The other point you need to note is that where we are, and I would have loved really at an appropriate time, and we've had these discussions with the president, to see that the minister who is coming to us on the 10th to launch the second ship, and you'd also want to note that the first ship was MT Kabaka Mutebi, because traditionally Buganda, the Lake Nalubari is for Buganda. But overall, and said, we have said the second ship is named MT Elgon, to see that the eastern axis. I can see my sister from Bugisu excited. Now, the point is that the four barges are of a very, very strategic advantage to this country, because now we can carry a total of 180 million liters of fuel, which is almost 3/4 of what Uganda has, because we consume between 200 to 210 million liters a month. Now, all this put together, we shall now save the roads. The roads, and if you look at our budget, Professor will tell you here, the first expenditure item which consumes most of our budget is road infrastructure. And you will note that every 3 years, the road between Malaba, Busia to Kampala has got to be repaired. Now look at the congestion. You also recall that during the time of COVID, we had one of the longest lines of oil tankers up to almost Webuye, 90 kilometers packed side by side, which were trapped because we couldn't get fuel into the country. The fuel prices overheated from about 3,800, 4,200 to almost 10,000 because of the logistics. Now, this is where we say we are answering the equation. It is cheaper for you to move fuel by water, and the first discussion between UNOC with the private players would have been with Mahadi. And that's why I want to say that obviously I've written to the minister, we have written to the minister, we have also written to Parliament to say that in mitigating this and to make sure the fuel price is cheaper, look at the cost benefit analysis. The economists here will tell you very much. If you don't reduce your costs of doing business, and this comes in from one, logistics, the price that you buy at, and the supply chain. If those costs are not looked at, obviously there is a tax component because we contribute 1,300, which is 25% of the cost per liter because it's soft tax. And if you note, out of the close to now 50 million Ugandans that we are talking about, or 46, only nearly 3 million are within the tax bracket, meaning that the Ugandans who are within the radar of Uganda Revenue Authority are far below 3 million people. You know that very well. Yeah. Because we have a young population. 55% of the population does not pay taxes. And when government of Uganda levies 1,300 as what you call soft tax, indirect tax, it is meant to make it easy, sweeten it, so that you don't take the quinine as bit as it were, like poll tax before, where you have to chase people. That's why when I was in the Committee on National Economy in the 6th Parliament, we had to find ways and means of ensuring that the tax is softer to the ordinary person. In conclusion, I want to say that this policy shift is going to be a learning curve for the country. And that's why Professor here indicated that there are many areas that we must look at very carefully in order not to ensure that we face thunderstorms or headwinds along the way. I think that the policy that has been drawn was long overdue. But we must make sure that the economies, first of all, market economy comes into play. We should not allow monopoly. We should ensure that all aspects of the supply chain end to end are properly managed.
Okay. We have a few minutes, so I'll give each of you 2 minutes to be able to conclude. Ali, I hope you can hit on transparency, especially between Vito and UNOC there, because some of the things that Professor did not speak about that I eavesdropped are questions on secrecy, transparency, if this document can be availed to the public. I'll start with Professor, and then Ali, over to Dr. Mhumza, Angelo, and lastly, Captain.
My parting shots. Yeah, thank you very much. I think it has been an interesting discussion. Personally, I've learned a lot, but there's one thing I'm aware of. The last few years, I know the president has been keen on patriotism all throughout his reign, but more especially in the last few years. Every time he speaks, he talks about patriotism and how it's going to be the answer to national transformation. As I said earlier, I'm one who believes that actually the state needs to be a key player and have its foot, its hand on some of these key sectors. So I totally have no problem with UNOC. But even UNOC, actually I applaud UNOC, but as a commercial player, I think it should have gotten some direction, except if we can be convinced there are no Ugandans who are ably playing. We cannot say because it's a commercial player, it's free to choose who it deals with. I think when you go to other countries, one thing which is clear is all other countries prioritize their own. They nurture them, they bump them up, they give them a comparative advantage to operate. We are somehow the only country which, when it gets something moving, we let it, we decide to allow people to do what they want, and normally then the foreigners make a good deal out of us. And I think, as I said, I really don't understand this sector, but that's what I would have loved to see. One that as we support UNOC, and as UNOC operates in that space where we have been cheated for a long time, it would have been good for UNOC to assess the local players. If there's none, we also need to know that there's none who is capable. But if there is a capable player like Mahavi or anyone else that is not here, I think they should have a comparative advantage. So I think let's learn to build local companies. They may not be the best, but we need to build capacity. Otherwise, this country will continue being controlled by foreigners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Ali.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me on behalf of the Minister. I would like to restate that this is a policy directive that has been evaluated by government and the HE and approved by cabinet and introduced in parliament. And we should maintain two layers of discussion. The first one is the one in the law where we are supporting our baby, And the way you've said that consideration for all the other players, I think all of us should applaud any step that is supporting UNOC to be a major player in this sector. Then the second layer is now the commercial dynamics, which you are asking, and at a policy level, I cannot be able to speak to them. The mandate I was given here. However, what is clear is that there is going to be consultations on this bill, and what I've seen is that there is going to be a framework for engagement, and part of the condition is the framework for engaging all the players, including the logistics players like Mahathi and all the other importers, to make sure that they are fully satisfied and their issues are handled. And I think that that opportunity is going to come, and hopefully, because this is in national interest, all we need to know is that we are cancelling Kenya, where it was at the border, and putting there Uganda. And Uganda, because Uganda, by law said, our trading entity for these aspects is UNOC. Now, when we put it there, how it does the business is another issue. And again, because by law we chose them and said, you do this, I think let's not be, as I've learned, when the doctors are operating, when we go to hospital, yes, there is a level at which we give opinions, but when the doctors enter the theater, they say, please, all of you, maybe keep out, we are going to come. As a country, in 2013, we made a decision and said our commercial entity for these aspects is the Uganda National Oil Company. So sometimes when they enter the operating theater, because the questions of veto and so on is their operation theater, maybe it is good for us to give them a benefit of doubt, for them to do work, and then we can see what support we can give. I think that's all I need to say. That there is a policy line of saying government is moving to replace Kenya at the border. There is a commercial line of saying 2013 we chose a son to do trading for us, who is the doctor specialist in that, and then let's support and see how to manage, but also question him. So when the opportunity comes, we question him in terms of numbers and so on, and what he is doing for us. And that's where the whole of that discussion of whether veto or another company comes through, but it is at a lower level. The major policy line is the one we are taking. Thank you
very much. Dr. Mhumza?
Well, I bridge two things. UNOC may be a doctor, but this is an intern doctor. So, caution is important.
Is it like one of our Mulago interns?
Exactly. This is an intern doctor. He still needs to be supervised and work with others. We need to have that. We seem to be throwing it to the deep end of the swimming pool, and there's need for caution there. Getting into captain's space. A plane doesn't just take off because you don't have margins of error.
No.
We are saying we ought to have been here 10 years ago. True. And we all want to support UNOC. Petronas, which is for the Malaysian equivalent, makes 15% of the government revenues, because it does more than just trading of oil. It also handles oil for other countries in its specialty. Aramco is the most profitable company in the world, the one for Saudi Arabia. 2 trillion. You might be talking of it or 500 billion, the other is 4 times as big. So I want UNOC to get there, but let's not rush. If a plane is late, please, you can tell some people and reschedule their flights. You have to book other people in hotels. You don't just run on the run and say, I'm late. No, you need to click the boxes. So let's take caution. UNOC will get there. But we don't want to push UNOC there and put the rest of the country at risk. Because the resource we are dealing with requires no margin of error. As he said, it's a cash traded. Where is the cash? You need continuous flow. 7 million liters every day. There must not be a shortfall of 500,000 liters. So for me, it is caution. Let's nurture the intern doctor. Eventually, he will get there.
He'll become a surgeon. Angelo, the intern doctor?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, the risk appetite for UNOC, I feel, should be high. Why? Because these national priorities economic independence, security of supply. These are not things that you're going to be sitting on your hands on. And I feel my sense is that that's why we've had these delays, because you postpone risk, you accommodate here, you do that. I think that to the extent that Ugandans can bear it and that it can be accountable to, its risk appetite should be consistent with the challenge that is at hand. That's one. But in conclusion, I wanted to say, first of all, I am happy that Honorable Mike Mkola is playing in this space with Mahadi. Mahadi, I'm proud to say, is a domestic investor. They have an investment license from the Uganda Investment Authority, and we're in the business of supporting what they are doing. So, Honorable Mike, continue doing what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
I congratulate you.
Yes, Captain.
Let me make the parting shots. Fuel, in terms of business, is highly inflammable. So let's start from there.
No pun intended.
So no malice intended. But make sure that when you're dealing with fuel, you make sure that you, as Doctor said, you tread carefully. We have very experienced players in Mahadi. People who have been in the oil trade for over 30 years, 25 years. Some have been in it for over 15 years. They would give time to lecture UNOC on how systems actually do work. So it will be good for UNOC to come and take time and get sometimes guidance and lectures from some of the professionals we have who have had both global, local, and regional participation in trade, especially of this nature. Number two is that while we are doing a policy shift, I want to look at Uganda as a patriot. Ugandans, as locals, are only participating in the economy to the tune of about 14%. For example, the Indian community contribute about 64.7% of our revenue streams in the country. It is also important for you to note that a company like Madvani, our good brother Madvani, I think contributes about 8%. I would like to see in time to come Ugandans coming in to participate in the oil trade, because that's how you domesticate and gain what you call sovereignty as a nation. You don't raise the political flag and keep the economic flag low. That is not independence. I really want to see that, like we have seen Kenyans participating in our economy as regional players within the East African community. If you have Starbucks, which is among the top 3 participating in our economy, you have Equity Bank, which is a private player in the financial sector, KCB, and many other multitudes of Kenyan financial institutions in our market. How many of ours play on the other side of the border? And that's why I want to say that I think we should have a deliberate policy which should have been encapsulated within our policy framework to build Ugandan content capacity, to have Ugandans in the oil sector, in the construction sector, in the beverage sector, and any other sector, to ensure that Uganda can retain the profits in Uganda and build Uganda as it were. Finally, I want to say that this policy shift is good, and I really support it, and I really thank the President for having had the foresight. And to see that currently, as it were, we are building the capacity of UNOC. But I want to really say that in this legislation, we need to have the private sector, mainly Ugandans, having the capacity to contribute to this legislation, so that we prepare short-term, medium-term, and long-term to take advantage of this policy shift. If not, this policy shift will only advantage the foreign players. And I conclude by saying, as Mahadi, we would like to thank government for this initiative. We will work very closely with UNOC. We will work very closely with government to see that we mitigate and reduce the forex outflows, mitigate and ensure that our balance of payments, which if you looked at, for example, today, assume that we are spending close to $7 million on imports per day, which will give you approximately $210 million a month and approximately close to 2.5 billion a year, $billion. It is a major factor, and fuel contributes to the reduction of poverty and increase of incomes, because any increase on fuel in the pump price increases, directly amplifies the state of the ordinary person in terms of living. Okay. So that when you have matoke coming from Kaba, from Bushenyi, or milk coming from Nyabushozi, meat and so on coming into the market in Kampala, you want to see that it is cost effective and the ordinary person in the village can benefit, so that the parish development model can now be able to work very well and will benefit the ordinary person. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me read some feedback here. I'd also like to take a moment to commend Dr. Mhumza, who consistently contributes his expertise to your program. He only not possesses remarkable knowledge in his field and also exemplifies a kind and generous spirit. His presence on your platform elevates the quality of discussion and engagement. Sifas Ediamu from Serere. Okay, Timothy comes in and says, thank you for the fair balance on the program. The topic was good on Uganda's oil sector, but fears of most Ugandans is graft. The oil may benefit all Ugandans unless the country's leadership and NRM changes heart, put off the greed appetite, taking every shilling that is laid at your hand, especially the officials that are concerned with oil. Okay, two more here. Daniel from a technical institute says, I appreciate the discussion so much. To me, investing is getting skilled citizens, both vocational and tertiary levels. Would be a great importance in order to avoid the spending in importing skills, manpower from outside. Okay. Chige from Iganga says, thank you for the program. I love the discussion going on. However, my appeal is that whatever the people in power do for the good of the country and for the generations to come, let them leave aside the selfish interests. There's a lot of hope in oil and gas sector if handled well. Kick corruption out of Uganda, okay? Finally, the proposed policy should be specific on which oil products, because the whole conversation is about petroleum products for fuel, okay? We'll leave it at that for today. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming through. Thank you very much, Professor. To my producer and the team that is behind there, thank you very much for making sure that we enjoy our evening here. We'll end it this way. The best way to predict the future is to create it. Good morning. A new dawn on Behind the Headlines with me, Timothy Nyangweso, every Wednesday live in our studio. In the heart of Kampala, we have conversations that have analysis, explanation, but not every truth is fact, and not every fact is truth. Every Wednesday, 10 p.m. on your public broadcaster.
All on your public broadcaster, UBC, inspiring Uganda.